Hey guys, so back with another video to try to help you guys out. I've gotten a lot of questions here over the last couple of days because you guys just took your first physio exam, and that tends to be where people had the biggest issue. It didn't seem like immuno got people, but physio, I've heard pretty across the board that like people got thumped by that. Um, and I know a lot of you have gone to your second year mentee or mentors asking, what can I do? How do I handle Fitzovich specifically? And none of them really have an answer for you because he was out last year for them. But my class did have Fitzovich. So that's what this is about. This video is literally just talking specifically about physiology, diving into fits as well. So what I'm going to start with is something I talked about in the last video is this semester is harder. And part of the reason it's harder is because you have now transitioned out of the classes in medical school where it's pure fact regurgitation. Anatomy was straight up fact regurgitation. MFM1, for the most part, was do you know this pathway or not? Histo, can you identify this? It just, you knew it or you didn't, and you just had to get it back out. Now, with physiology, you have that component, and you have conceptual component to it, which is probably where most people fall short. It's no longer sufficient just to know the details. You really have to start understanding stuff. And that's not just for class, because in the long run, class isn't necessarily what matters. But if you don't understand this stuff, you're going to get hit later down the road, because physiology is going to come back in second year. Every course that you take, every system has a physiology component to it. So it's going to come back. And if you understand it now, you're better off then, you're better off then, and you're better off for boards. So ultimately, with physiology, my best advice, very bland, I'll get into more details in a second, is understand what's being presented to you. Don't just accept it as fact and say, okay, that is what it is. Let me cram these 500 Anki cards and we'll be fine. Because you won't. A lot of you have seen that you weren't fine. It takes a lot of brain power to get through tests, especially with Dr. Fitzovich. So let's talk about Dr. Fitzovich specifically here for a second. So the one thing I'll say is, yes, you guys saw his question style. You've seen his lecturing style. The one thing I will tell you is from the physio department, Dr. Fitzovich writes questions that are the most like USMLE. Comlex doesn't write questions quite the same way. There's a little bit like it. But if you're someone who really wants to take step, Dr. Fitzovich writes questions the way they do. Because when it comes to boards, there's always going to be these toss-up easy, first order questions. But a lot more often, you're going to have stuff like you saw on this test, where, he gives you kind of a convoluted question. It's kind of hard to figure out what he's trying to ask you and what he wants out of it. And then you just have to be able to decipher that and then apply a concept to a situation you never could have thought of. That's the big thing with Dr. Fitzovich. Like I said, it's no longer sufficient to just know the details. You have to understand it. And that starts from day one, from watching the lecture, from studying the lecture, from reviewing the lectures. No longer just, memorize what the different synapses are, or, the neurotransmitters, or different things you see if you cut, a nerve at a certain spot or deaden it here or there, anything. And you'll see further into, physio with, the heart, lungs, GI system. There's a lot of details to memorize, but you need to be asking yourself, why? Why does this happen? Because if you can come up with an answer, an explanation as to why something is happening, why does it do this versus that in response to whatever stimuli, then there's nothing they can throw at you on the test that's going to get you, unless you misinterpret the question, which is always a possibility. You're human. It's going to happen on every exam you ever take. You're going to misinterpret something. So that's not something you can adjust for. You can just prep as well as you can. So with Dr. Fitzovich, if there is a chart or a graph in his PowerPoint anywhere at all, you need to know it like the back of your hand. And I don't mean memorize it and draw it. I mean explain every single detail about it. Manipulate it. What can you do that would alter the shape of a graph? that would change different things. How would it respond if I, increase this variable versus decrease this variable? Because I have not seen your test. I haven't asked anybody about test questions, but I guarantee there were graphs on it. And most of you probably went and looked at it and was like, this isn't what we covered. But it was a concept he was going after with that graph. And that's the kind of thing that I appreciated from Dr. Fitzovich is, yes, it was hard, but when it came time for boards, I had already learned how to take that style of question. That is how it's going to be. You're going to have these super convoluted things. So that's first with him. Every single graph, if there's a graph, know everything about it. Next with him is if he puts out practice questions, don't be the person who does the practice question and goes, oh, good, I got a 4 out of 5. We're done here. I must know this stuff. Good, you knew 4 out of 5 facts that he could throw at you. But what Dr. Fitzovich will do consistently is those questions he's writing for a reason, okay? What you need to do when you review those questions, great. If you got, all of them right, great, you're in a good spot. If you got 2 out of the 5 right or whatever it is, okay, obviously you have work to do. But at the same time, every person should be doing the same thing next, where take that question, explain why every single answer choice is incorrect in that exact scenario in that question stem. And then for each answer choice, change the question to make that the right answer. Okay? Because you wait and see, one of those scenarios you come up with is going to show up. Okay? He's giving you the material. And this goes for every class. If a professor ever hands out practice questions, explain why every answer is wrong, and then also try to create your own question that would make that the correct answer based on the same kind of idea and concept. It's more active, and that's what makes med school from here on out harder. The studying from here on out is more active. It's more, I want to say brain consuming. It's not the right word, but it takes more energy. So that's that with, as far as him specifically and lecture stuff goes, go into their office and talk to them. Kind of pick their brain, talk to any of the physio staff. If you're in Harrogate and he's only in Knoxville, then go talk to someone from the staff. I know you don't know them, but it's a good way to, kind of see how they think. Now, as far as actual prepping for exams, obviously watch the lectures. If there's something that you're not very clear on, you have a couple options. You can go in and talk to them in person, which was not my thing to do. I wanted to learn it on my own, because like I said, if I can explain it to me, I'm not going to forget it. Boards and Beyond is very, very good. It doesn't follow perfectly everything that we might cover, but if there's something where you're like, oh, I didn't really quite get that, go watch Boards and Beyond and see if he can explain it and then come back to the lecture. Don't fall into the trap of only learning Boards and Beyond because you're not being tested on that. Go make sure you understand it and then come back to the lecture and add all the extra pieces in. But get the basics and the concepts down cold. As far as practicing for the test, and this goes across the board for physio, practice questions, and practice questions. So there's only, a finite number of ways they can ask a question, right? It's pretty extensive, but the more questions you do, the more likely you are to have seen a scenario similar. So start with BRS Physiology. It's probably one of the best books you could buy for yourself. Read the chapters along with things, do the questions and see where you're at. It really is, it's the basics. Hey, you need to have at least this down. Once you feel pretty good and you're a little less than a week out from the test, there's a practice question book. It's Guyton Hall. It's floating around somewhere. It's the one with the blue cover. The other one's just a textbook. The one I want you to have, the blue cover or the blue stripe on the cover, is a just question book. Now, they're harder. They are good. They're more written like a Dr. Fitzovich type question, a little more involved. But it is written more geared towards a second-year student who has already taken cardiology and now they're throwing physio back in. So the questions early on in the blocks are usually basic physio. As you get further and further into them, they start to convolute more into the second year material where you need to know the pathologies and the pharmacology stuff. But do as much as you can. Keep doing the questions. If you read something, realize whether or not it's something you actually have to know. If in lecture they never once presented to you the time it takes for an electrical impulse to get from, through the AV node, who cares about that question? It's just a fact for you to memorize and lose other stuff. Be smart about your studies is what I'm saying. Do as many as you can, but if it's obviously not something that's going to be important to you, dump it. So that would be my second step. Guyton Hall before test weekend if you have the option, as much as you can. I always tried to have it done. Then the last book, there's a pre-test physiology. It was okay. That's why I save it for last. If you've got extra time, it's something you might be able to throw some stuff to. Come back to BRS as well. Make sure you understand why every single question is the answer it is. Not just, hey, how did I do? If you're the person who's still counting to just see what your score was, you're the person who's going to be angry on test day, or once scores release, you need to learn from this. The goal here, realistically long term, is to retain this stuff, understand this stuff for COMLEX in step 1. So that's really it. Give me just a sec, guys. I'm scrolling through a message I sent someone about this. Yeah, that's really everything there. There's one program called Physio, like Physeo. I didn't use it. Feel free to give it a shot. I don't know. I know someone who did use that, and they went from really not doing well to doing pretty well. Don't know why or how, but that was, just one person, one anecdotal case. But for the other professor, I don't know who all is teaching you, but I know someone mentioned Palazzolo later. You guys will get introduced to him. Question style is a little more erratic. I felt with Fitz, I could basically guess kind of where he was going to sit with questions. It's just how was he going to ask them, in interpretation. Dr. Palazzolo is a little bit harder to pin down. Also, he will put out a PDF. You have to read it. They're long. They are a struggle to get through. Sometimes there's a lot of extra information in there too. He wrote that. It's kind of his textbook form of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff in there that you don't need to know. You don't need to know the molecular weight of different hormones or enzymes, kind of thing. Be smart. Don't put brain power into memorizing things like that or exact structures of stuff. Maybe know the components of something like a bile acid or a bile salt, but how much is that going to get you? Maybe a point here or there. Be smart, but you do have to read his PDF because he lectures off of a very simplified PowerPoint during first year, but expects you to know what's in his PDF. Okay. So that's where, the struggle is you might feel like, oh, I've got this pretty well down. As far as like respiratory phys goes. And then you get to the test and you're like, what the hell was that? Yeah. That'll happen. Also, same thing for him, graphs. Be able to explain every single graph you ever see in physiology, not just memorize it, like to explain everything to yourself. Okay, that is the best way to study because if it's important, there's probably a graph for it. That's kind of how I looked at it. And then again, on step and COMLEX, they're going to throw those at you, ask you to interpret them, and they're literally not even going to be something that you could have prepped for. You're just going to have to throw concepts and interpret graphs. So that's my advice for physio. I really enjoyed physio. I tutored it last year, and it was one of the things, it's a subject that you really do want to know. I think it's the third or fourth biggest section on USMLE and COMLEX. So it's something you need to know. It's the basis for most everything second year too. And again, it'll come back. So if you didn't do well on this first test and you didn't really understand this stuff, don't stress too much. But just keep at it. Don't turn your back on MFM just because you're worried about physio, because you're about to hit micro, and this is super important. Okay. And with that, sketchy is good. Dr. Colley hates it. Make sure you study his PowerPoints on top of sketchy. Okay. So that's it. If there's any questions or anything, just comment. I'll keep an eye on the page if enough stuff comes in, or send me a message on Facebook. If enough people send me kind of the same idea, I'll just do another video if you guys have kind of general questions. I know this is tough with physio because the class ahead of you didn't have fits, but it will be okay. Physio is hard, we know, but it's important. And really, if you dedicate the time, and the effort to it, to understanding, I think it'll be more enjoyable for you, and life down the road, even into third year. When a patient presents in front of you a certain way, you can explain why, not just, oh, well, this is what they have. So good luck. Keep working. See you guys.